everyone. I'm Van Gelder. I'm a professor in the Department of Theater and Dance and director of the dance program. And we are really excited about the opening night on Friday, March 19th, and the week-long streaming of Time and Space, University Dancers' 36th annual concert. In preparation for the concert, I'm hosting short interviews with designers and choreographers who made work in the concert. And I am joined by Kayla Schiltz, a junior dance major who created her independent studies project for Time and Space. Welcome, Kayla.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So you created your first work as a dance major, I'm Glad I'm a. And so I'd like you to talk to us about how you started your process, and actually when did you start your process? And of course, who knew there was going to be a pandemic when you're creating your independent studies? So tell us a little bit about how you created your work.
Well, speaking of the pandemic, it made me change my concept because I actually started thinking about it since the ending of freshman year. I had another concept dealing with empathy because that was a huge theme that was discussed in multiple courses that I had, and even in a piece that I was in freshman year for university dancers. But with empathy, I expected a lot of physical body contact with my dancers to really show the theme. But with the pandemic, we couldn't have that with social distancing and all. So then I was stuck for a bit. I already had pieces of music that I wanted to use, so I just stuck with those, but I tried to come up with a new concept to play with. But like I said, I was stuck for a while. So when I actually got into the studio, I would just play the music and see what kind of feelings or ideas that would pop up as I was improvising to it. And as I was going along with the improvising process, I started to think about my movement improv course that I took the year before and a game that we played. And that's when we wrote specific roles and then on pieces of paper, and then we would pick up random ones and then try to improv to that role. And so then I wrote down 3 roles: hider, seeker, and witness. And as I would play those roles, I noticed that I would do similar movements pertaining to that role. And then I would question myself, why would I perform specific movements when I had a specific role? And that made me think about my psychology course and how we talked about from a very young age, we were taught and also naturally categorized things in life. Dealing with shapes, colors, people, and then that got into stereotypes. And that's when I started thinking more about my concept, and that was critiquing society and how we try to oversimplify people by trying to describe them in a few words just to place them into a role or a box. And then we navigate our lives through those boxes. And I just thought about all the misconnections that we have with potential people just based on trying to live our lives through stereotypes. And so I wanted my piece to really deal about identity, but not so much through specific roles, just being a human being in general.
Right. Yeah, and I can say I've seen the video. Not only have I seen rehearsals, but I've seen the final video, and it's really wonderful. So I can't wait for everybody to see it on Friday night. Yeah. And one of sort of linking into what you're saying too about people being individuals, and I know that the way that that you created your piece was also collaborative with the dancers, and you would connect with the way they would do a certain movement. So, unfortunately, one of the dancers in your piece was not able to perform sort of at the last minute. And so you were the one who ended up taking the role and performing that part. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to have to shift from being the creator and the director into being the performer?
Well, the first thought I had was, wow, the pandemic did not miss me and said, we will affect you too somehow. um, but yeah, you would think it would be easy for me to step into the piece because I was the one who created it. But then, interestingly, when I had the first rehearsal with my dancers, when I was trying to take on that role, I had a not a tough time, but it was a little difficult for me to step back into that role because once I created the piece for my dancers, they took it as their own and then they made it for themselves. And so then I watched it for the majority of the year on other people. So then when I had to do it for myself, I felt awkward in some movements. So then I had to find my own identity with the piece again. So I found myself having to be in the studio to kind of come up with some movements so that I could feel comfortable in the piece and make it my own.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's a hard transition to make because, like you say, it seems like it would be easy, but it's really quite challenging. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but you did great.
Thank you.
And speaking of that, you also then had to change your costumes or actually just create another costume
Yeah.
for yourself. So, could you talk a little bit about just your process of developing the costume, the research that you did, and then the design, and then the construction?
So with the costumes, I did have a tough time coming up with the concept at first because I know that when audience members watch a piece, they try to figure out the storyline and they look to the costumes to try to figure out what roles people are playing in those stories. And I thought that that would go against the concept of my piece of trying not to fit people into the roles, especially since I had one male dancer and two female dancers. I didn't want people to play into that and think about any gender roles or anything like that. So I really had to think of costumes that anyone could basically wear and the audience wouldn't read into it too much. And so eventually I started to think about a long sleeve unitard that would cover the whole body because that itself is a very vulnerable costume because we're literally seeing every part of your body. And since I'm questioning identity, that goes into that. And then I've always been a fan of skin tone colors. And so I thought that would also play into my concept very well. So not only are we seeing the shape of one's body, but now we're seeing the skin color. So now it's like you're just seeing that person's body on stage. And then I don't remember how this came about, but eventually I started thinking about fingerprints and how when you think of a fingerprint, you know that each one is different. And then that a fingerprint, a human fingerprint means that it's a human being. Um, and so I wanted to give the audience at least a little clue as to what the piece was kind of trying to get at. And so I thought a fingerprint would be a good idea. And then also with the fingerprint, we know that it's unique to each human being, but we also don't know a person's story based on their fingerprint, which I also thought would get to my theme because from just a baseline, we should just understand that everyone's a human being and that we don't know who they really are unless you have real, genuine conversations with them and real life experiences with that person. So when people view my piece, I just want them to know that these are human beings. Let's see how they interact as human beings and not so much the roles that they have to be. And so for the actual construction of the costumes, I had to cut in half 6 costumes. There were 3 black unitards and 3 nude ones. I cut them in half so that I can sew the front part, which was nude, to the back part, which was black. And then for one of my dancers, Kimmy, I had to dye his so that I can match his skin tone better. And then eventually mine when we had to make my own costume. Um, and then once I sewed all those together, then I actually got a projector, put a picture of a fingerprint on it so that we could see it on the unitards as they were hung up on a wall. And then I started tracing them with a Sharpie. And then once those were traced, I had to put the costumes onto a cardboard so it could stretch out the fabric. And then I started painting it with fabric paint. I say the painting and the tracing were the longest parts of the process. But it was also relaxing at the same time because I just got to paint. It was a little distraction. But yeah, those were the main parts of the process for the costumes. And like you said, I had to make one for myself, which luckily and surprisingly didn't take as long as the other ones because I had practice with the other ones. So that was good. It didn't take too long.
Yeah, I remember that you didn't have much notice that where you said,
Yeah.
I've got to make another costume. So you did great, by the way, and
Thank
really,
you.
I can't wait for everybody to see your piece and to consider the things that you've talked about, which are really important. So thank you so much, Kayla, for being here and for sharing your work with us.
Oh, thank you.